Hello and welcome to Byju's IAS. Let's take up the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper by looking at an article from page number 8 of the Delhi edition. This editorial evaluates the vehicle scrappage policy that was recently brought out by the Ministry of Road Transport and Highways. Over the last few days, we have covered the provisions of this policy in complete detail, and as you know, the government is planning to implement this policy over a time period that stretches from 2022 to 2024. Under this policy, the objective is to phase out those vehicles which are older than 15 to 20 years and push these vehicles towards scrappage in order to promote the adoption of newer vehicles so that it can result in both economic and environmental benefits. The policy proposes to phase out government and commercial vehicles that are older than 15 years and private vehicles that are older than 20 years, and it mandates these category of vehicles to get a fitness certificate. Failure to pass the fitness test will result in the deregistration of the vehicle, and the policy is designed to promote the scrappage of these vehicles and push the consumers to adopt newer vehicles by offering them a set of incentives. As a part of these incentives, the centre has directed the state governments to waive off road tax for these vehicles which are replacing the older vehicles. And the centre has also offered to waive off the registration fee for the newer vehicles. It has also issued an advisory to the auto industry to provide genuine discounts to the customers when they are replacing their older vehicles with newer vehicles. In line with this policy, the Road Transport Ministry has also decided to impose a green tax on old and polluting vehicles in order to discourage the customers from using these old polluting vehicles on road. See, the government has brought in this policy with one eye on its environmental benefits and with another eye on its potential to revive the economy in the midst of the pandemic. In fact, many countries around the world are adopting a similar policy to boost economic growth which has been affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. Because the auto sector constitutes a significant part of the economy, and the automobile and related industries contribute to around 7.5% of India's GDP. So by pushing for the adoption of newer vehicles, the government is planning to boost the demand for the automobile sector and thereby create lakhs of jobs while improving fuel efficiency of the vehicles, which will not only help in reducing India's import bill, but will also bring in the added environmental benefit of reducing air pollution. So the editorial praises the policy for its vision, but it also points out its shortcomings and as well as identifies the challenges that lie ahead. See, the biggest challenge for the successful implementation of this policy lies in enforcement. Because in a short span of time, the central government will have to work with the state governments to put in place a credible fitness certification system, because according to estimates, there are more than 3 million vehicles in the country which are more than 15 or 20 years old as identified by the scrappage policy. So getting all these vehicles certified for their fitness is not going to be an easy task, and this certification system will also have to be credible and foolproof. For this purpose, the centre will have to work very closely with the state governments in order to ensure strict enforcement of these provisions, in order to prevent the customers from bypassing the policy at any cost. The next challenge for the centre would be to work with state governments with regard to waiving off of road tax and registration fees, and this is not going to be an easy task because the states will have to compromise on their revenue to an extent. And we have already seen the kind of conflicts that can emerge between the centre and the states with regard to the implementation of the amendments to the Motor Vehicles Act. Over the last several months, the centre has been pushing for amendments to the Motor Vehicles Act, but many states have resisted, and such a centre-state conflict should not be allowed to disrupt the enforcement and implementation of the scrappage policy. The next challenge for the centre would be to ensure that the automobile industry provides for genuine discounts in order to incentivize the customers and promote the adoption of newer vehicles to replace the older vehicles. See, the main target of this policy is the heavy commercial vehicles, which contribute heavily to pollution and as well as to emissions. According to the Road Ministry's data, there are at least 1.7 million heavy commercial vehicles in the country which lack fitness certification, and it's not going to be an easy task to enforce the policy on these vehicles. Because most of these old heavy commercial vehicles are operated and used by small businesses around the country, and they have already opposed the vehicle scrappage policy because it's going to increase their cost of operation. Overcoming these challenges would be crucial to the success of this policy and will also play a key role in determining the future of India's automobile industry. Now, coming to the shortcomings of this policy, the biggest drawback is that the government has lost an opportunity to focus more on fuel efficiency and reduction of emissions, and it has lost the opportunity to promote the concept of ecological scrapping. See, right now under the policy, incentives are being offered to any new vehicle that is being bought by the customer to replace the older vehicles which are being scrapped. So instead of providing such blanket incentives for all new vehicles, the government should have deliberately focused more on electric vehicles, because this would have achieved twin environmental objectives of not just reducing pollution but also reducing greenhouse gas emissions. See, under the Paris Accord of the Climate Change Convention, countries around the world are moving towards a net zero emission economy by 2050, and India has a dedicated plan in place known as the National Electric Mobility Mission Plan to push the adoption of electric vehicles in the country. But however, the vehicle scrappage policy was a golden opportunity for India to direct the incentives towards electric vehicles and to discourage the adoption of fossil fuel based vehicles, especially those which run on diesel. The incentives could have been designed in such a manner to provide more priority to electric vehicles, which would have helped in pushing the customers towards the purchase of electric vehicles, thereby achieving the objectives of the National Electric Mobility Mission Plan as well. Plus, to achieve these targets of the Paris Accord, ecological scrapping has become a key concept where the reuse and recycling of old materials is promoted in order to reduce the pressure on the environment. So through the vehicle scrappage policy, the government could have used the incentives to reward those companies and those customers who are opting for such vehicles with reused and recycled items. See, when old vehicles are being pushed to scrappage, definitely a lot of material can be recovered, including metal, plastic, etc. And most of these materials can be recycled and reused, thereby significantly reducing the mining pressure and the resource pressure on the environment. Then more importantly, hazardous materials in vehicles such as batteries, plastics and polymers, etc., they could be reused and recycled, which further reduces the threat to the environment. So if the vehicle scrappage policy had used the incentives to reward such ecological scrapping and fuel efficiency with the promotion of electric vehicles, then it would have resulted in larger environmental benefits that could help us not only tackle pollution but also bring down the emissions of greenhouse gases. Now let's take up a column from page number 9 written by T.P. Srinivasan. T.P. Srinivasan is a former ambassador of India, and he has represented India on the board of governors to the International Atomic Energy Agency. In this column, he evaluates Iran's nuclear program and whether it would be possible for the International Atomic Energy Agency to help Iran work out an alternative nuclear deal. But before we look at the author's argument, first let's talk about the International Atomic Energy Agency. See, the IAEA is an international organization that seeks to promote the peaceful usage of nuclear energy, and it also seeks to inhibit the military usage of nuclear technology, that is the development of nuclear weapons. This institution was established as an autonomous organization in 1957, and India happens to be one of the founding members. Even though the IAEA is not a UN institution, it does report to the UN General Assembly and the UN Security Council on matters related to nuclear disarmament and on matters related to the promotion of the objectives of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. This international organization is headquartered in Vienna, and it serves as an intergovernmental forum for promoting scientific and technical cooperation amongst the countries to promote the peaceful usage of nuclear technology and nuclear power. Then to be a member of the IAEA, it's not mandatory to sign or ratify the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty or the NPT. So this organization primarily promotes the civilian applications of nuclear technology, and it actively works to inhibit the military applications of nuclear technology. As per this mandate, the IAEA has three primary areas of work, which includes nuclear safety and nuclear security. This is to ensure the safety and security of nuclear material and nuclear technology at nuclear plants in order to prevent its proliferation and as well as its accidental leakage. Because if there is nuclear proliferation and if nuclear material and technology falls into the wrong hands, then it threatens the nuclear security of the world. And even if there is accidental leakage of nuclear material into the environment, it threatens nuclear safety. And hence the IAEA is focused on ensuring the safety and security of nuclear technology around the world. It is also focused on the science and technology associated with nuclear research, and it functions as a hub for promoting the peaceful civilian applications of nuclear technology. This includes the generation of nuclear power, the usage of nuclear technology in cancer treatment, and as well as its wide applications in several industries. Then at the same time, it implements a safeguards and verification mechanism in order to ensure that no country is involved in nuclear proliferation or in the leakage of nuclear material and nuclear technology. As a part of the safeguards and verification mechanism, the IAEA has the powers to carry out inspection of nuclear facilities in order to ensure that they are being used for peaceful purposes only. It also focuses on developing the safety and security standards which will have to be followed by the member states. So as a part of this mandate, the IAEA is responsible for assisting in the enforcement of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. See, the NPT was brought in 1968 and it entered into force in 1970 with the objective of preventing the spread of nuclear weapons technology and to promote cooperation amongst countries in the peaceful uses of nuclear energy and to further the goal of achieving nuclear disarmament. But a few countries like India, Israel, and Pakistan, they haven't signed the Non-Proliferation Treaty ever because according to them, the NPT is discriminatory in nature. Apart from India, Israel, and Pakistan, even South Sudan hasn't signed the NPT, largely because the country is in a state of civil war after becoming newly independent. North Korea, on the other hand, was a signatory but later quit the NPT in order to pursue its development of nuclear weapons. But from the very beginning, India, Israel, and Pakistan have opposed the NPT, and India especially would never sign the NPT because of its discriminatory nature. Because under the NPT, only 5 official nuclear weapon states have been recognized, which includes the United States, Russia, United Kingdom, France, and China. This treaty sets a cutoff date, and only those countries which possess nuclear weapons before this cutoff date are allowed to retain their nuclear weapons, and they are officially recognized as the nuclear weapon states. So basically, these P5 countries, they already had nuclear weapons before the cutoff date, and hence they get to retain their nuclear weapons. But however, the other countries which did not possess nuclear weapons before this cutoff date, they will be treated as non-nuclear weapon states, and they will have to agree to never acquire nuclear weapons in the future. And in return, these P5 countries, that is the nuclear weapon states, they will provide for exchange of nuclear technology for peaceful and civilian purposes. So basically, any country outside of the P5, if they were to sign the NPT, it basically means that they will have to give up their desire of ever developing nuclear weapons for the security of the country. But considering the strategic concerns of India and the security environment around India, India decided to not sign the NPT because India wanted to reserve the option of developing nuclear weapons in order to protect its national security interests and strategic interests. On similar lines, even Israel and Pakistan have never signed the NPT. But since every other country has signed the NPT, ensuring that these countries don't turn civilian nuclear technology into nuclear weapons technology becomes the responsibility of the IAEA through its verification and safeguards program. The IAEA has the powers to conduct frequent inspection of nuclear facilities in order to ensure that nuclear technology and material is being used only for peaceful purposes in these non-nuclear weapon states. So with this background, let's come back to our discussion and focus on the column. See, we know that Iran has an active nuclear weapons program, which has often been targeted by the rivals of Iran, which includes the United States, Israel, and Saudi Arabia. Over the last couple of decades, Iran's nuclear weapons program has led to serious tensions in West Asia because primarily Iran's pursuit of nuclear weapons was targeted at the US, Israel, and Saudi Arabia, which have all posed a challenge to Iran's national security and strategic interests in West Asia. Over the years, these three countries have explored many options to deter Iran from developing nuclear weapons. Because if Iran succeeds in developing nuclear weapons, it would alter the balance of power in the region, thereby increasing the threat posed by Iran to its regional rivals, that is, Israel and Saudi Arabia. So, over the years, these countries have resorted to overt military attacks against Iran's nuclear facilities in order to disrupt its nuclear weapons program. They have even conducted covert operations targeting Iran's nuclear scientists and as well as Iran's nuclear facilities, especially nuclear centrifuge facilities, which are used in enriching low-grade uranium to weapons-grade uranium. US and Israel in particular are also known to have targeted Iran through a covert cyber war by using a malware known as Stuxnet. Through the Stuxnet malware, US and Israel reportedly disrupted the functioning of several Iranian nuclear centrifuge facilities in order to derail Iran's nuclear weapons program. So these overt and covert attacks aimed at Iran's nuclear weapons program had increased tensions between these countries. And in order to further cripple Iran's abilities to develop nuclear weapons, the United States targeted Iran with a set of economic sanctions. These sanctions, which were in operation between 2009 and 2015, ended up crippling Iran's economy because they were primarily targeted at the core sectors of Iran, such as oil, defense, etc. As Iran felt threatened by these aggressive actions of US, Israel, and Saudi Arabia, Iran also started retaliating near the Strait of Hormuz in order to destabilize the West Asia region. So these growing tensions reached a point where US and Iran were almost at the brink of war. But thankfully, a full blown out war between US and Iran was avoided because a landmark nuclear deal was signed in 2015 known as the JCPOA or the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. This nuclear deal was worked out between Iran and the P5+1 countries, including the European Union. The term P5+1 refers to the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council, and +1 over here refers to Germany. So with the joint efforts of the 5 permanent members of the Security Council and Germany and European Union, the JCPOA was worked out, through which Iran committed to scale down its nuclear weapons program and push towards nuclear disarmament, and in return these countries would provide civilian nuclear technology to Iran. So the signing of this historic deal provided for some stability in West Asia and reduced tensions between US and Iran. And between 2015 and 18, all these countries were moving towards normalization. But in 2018, President Donald Trump unilaterally withdrew the US from this deal by alleging that Iran was not abiding by the commitments of the nuclear deal, and he made unsubstantiated allegations that Iran had violated the deal and it had started enriching uranium to again develop nuclear weapons. These claims of Donald Trump was not certified by the IAEA because under the terms of the deal, Iran had agreed to allow the inspectors of IAEA to carry out their verification, and according to them, Iran was abiding by the JCPOA. But following this American withdrawal from the deal, economic sanctions were reimposed on Iran by the United States, and it has again ended up having a crippling effect on Iran's economy. So again, Iran retaliated against American interests in the region, thereby scaling up tensions in West Asia. And recently, it has again given an open call to start pursuing nuclear weapons for its deterrence. Now, this is where the writer says that the International Atomic Energy Agency can play a positive role and help strike an alternative deal with Iran that excludes the United States because Iran simply doesn't trust the US anymore. It was in the face of coercive American diplomacy that Iran became aggressive in the pursuit of its nuclear weapons, because Iran also sees nuclear weapons as a strong deterrent against any such external interference by regional and global powers. Here, the writer points out that Iran has always looked up to the Indian model because, due to its well designed strategy, India managed to overcome the impact of the NPT. And today, India has not only managed to acquire nuclear weapons for strategic reasons, but it is also moving towards gaining global legitimacy as a responsible nuclear power. The writer points out that Iranian nuclear negotiators and diplomats have always felt that Iran did a mistake back then by first signing the NPT. This is where they appreciate India's stand of not signing the NPT as it was discriminatory in nature, and this allowed India the option to develop nuclear weapons. And eventually, when India tested its nuclear weapons in 1974 and in 1998, India was doing this outside of the international arrangement, that is, outside the NPT, and hence, initially, India's nuclear weapons program was also branded as a rogue nuclear weapons program. That's the reason why the US has always targeted India's nuclear weapons program, especially between the 1970s and 1990s. When India carried out the Pokhran 2 tests, it was a direct breach of NPT, and that's the reason why US, China, and many other countries targeted India with economic and technological sanctions. But these sanctions didn't affect India much, and it didn't succeed in derailing India's nuclear weapons program because India had already achieved a high level of maturity in its nuclear weapons program, and eventually this gave India the bargaining power to negotiate its way out of these sanctions without affecting its autonomy and sovereignty. Today, the United States itself has recognized India as a responsible nuclear power, and it has even signed a nuclear deal through which it has committed to help India become a member of the Nuclear Suppliers Group as well. So today, with the support of the United States, most countries around the world, they have given recognition to India's nuclear program, and India is well on its way to being recognized as a responsible nuclear power without even having to sign the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Now, this is where Iran envies India's model, but now it's too late for Iran to walk out of NPT because there are going to be serious consequences and repercussions. Because if Iran were to quit the NPT and continue pursuing the nuclear weapons, then definitely there would be overt military attacks against it launched by US, Israel, and Saudi Arabia. Even the new Biden administration which has come in has not offered Iran any relief from these economic sanctions. And as of now, there is no hope for any immediate reconciliation between US and Iran. So in this context, the writer argues that the International Atomic Energy Agency can play a critical role by insisting that Iran should abide strictly by its NPT commitments and discourage Iran from pursuing nuclear weapons and put a stop to its ongoing nuclear enrichment, which it was forced to restart following the hostile policies of the United States. So since Iran and US have lost complete faith in each other, and since there is no trust between them, it's almost impossible to revive the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. The other signatories to this deal, that is European countries like UK, France, and even Russia and China, and even Germany, they have been trying to revive the deal, but it's unlikely to happen because there is a complete loss of faith and trust in the Iran-US relationship. So in this context, the only possible alternative can be provided by the International Atomic Energy Agency because it can pursue a parallel negotiation with Iran and work out a parallel alternative deal which can bring Iran back to the path of peaceful nuclear development by abandoning its pursuit of nuclear weapons. Through its safeguard and verification mechanism and through its inspections, the IAEA can enforce the provisions of NPT on Iran and convince Iran through a parallel deal the continued benefits of civilian nuclear technology in return for its commitment to place the country on the path to complete disarmament. Now let's take up a column from page number 8 that explores the growth opportunities for companies in the Indian economy. The writers of this column argue that While economic experts and investors are busy observing China's rapid growth, they have ended up missing out on the real economic shift that is happening in the global economy, which is the resilience of the Indian economy and the growth opportunities available in the Indian economy, which leads the authors to label this decade as India's decade of growth. See, almost every major company and every major investor in the world, they have already started looking at India as a key growth market in their long-term strategies. Be it technology firms such as Google, Facebook, Apple, or be it global retail firms like Walmart, or be it automobile manufacturers, they're all looking at India as a key growth market. And this explains the record FDI inflows that have come into the country last year despite the pandemic. Despite the hardships created by the pandemic and the lockdown, India received more than $60 billion in FDI inflows, making it a new milestone in the history of FDI inflows into India. But these companies and investors, they are well aware of the complex regulatory environment that they have to deal with in India. See, even though it has been 3 decades since India initiated the LPG reforms of liberalization, privatization, and globalization, there are still several complex policies and regulations of the government which is acting as a market entry and market access barrier to these foreign companies. But however, they do understand that while they're investing in an emerging market, they're bound to face these risks. And before investing in such emerging economies, these corporations, they always evaluate the risk to opportunity ratio. According to the writers of this column, this is where the opportunity lies for India to turn this decade into India's decade of growth. According to them, there are 4 key factors which go in India's favor. And these are the factors which keep these large investors and companies invested in the Indian economy. First, of course, is India's tremendous advantage with regard to its demographics. Its vast population enables India to become one of the largest markets in the world for any sector. And considering the authoritative government and policies of China and its authoritative restrictions, the Indian market, which comes second in size to the Chinese market, becomes the most attractive for the foreign investors. Then upon this, the ready availability of a cheap and reliable workforce, accompanied with their increasing purchasing power, makes India a very, very attractive market for the investors and the companies. Then the second factor which goes in India's favor is the changing geopolitics of the world. As the United States and China get locked in a trade war, and as they compete with each other in almost every domain, including the domain of technology, it opens up numerous opportunities for other emerging countries such as India and Vietnam. In fact, Vietnam has already taken a leap ahead of India, and it has capitalized on this conflict between US and China to turn itself into a hub for the startups. And this rapid rise of Vietnam in the technology sector has made India realize the immense opportunities that open up because of the changing geopolitics of the Indo-Pacific region. Then along with this, the rapid rise in digital connectivity in the country is a blessing for the whole economy, especially for the tech-driven industries. The widespread adoption of digital economy by India and the increasing penetration of mobile phones and internet opens up a vast untapped market, and this is exactly what these companies and investors are interested in. Then finally, India as an economy has become very resilient in the last 15 to 20 years. And it appears that no matter what challenges are thrown at it, it eventually manages to bounce back and emerge stronger. There can be no better illustration of this fact than the rapid recovery that India has registered following the global pandemic. As economies around the world started to crash with the breakout of the pandemic and the imposition of the lockdowns, even India witnessed a similar downturn in its economy. But within a span of few months, the Indian economy displayed its resilience, which is a result of its strong civilizational and cultural ethos and the strong willpower of its people. So even the lockdown and the pandemic disrupted the Indian economy for few months. It managed to bounce back very quickly and stage a solid recovery, thus making it one of the fastest growing economies in the world despite the pandemic. Hence, the writers conclude that for companies with global ambitions, it is worthy of their time and money to remain invested in India's growth story, despite its inherent complexities and inconsistencies. Now let's look at the mains practice questions. The first question: the new vehicle scrappage policy can work if incentives are confined to fuel efficient vehicle replacements. Critically analyze. The second question: Iran nuclear deal could be rescued by the International Atomic Energy Agency. A new initiative by IAEA may help to find an alternative to the JCPOA in the changed circumstances. Evaluate the possibility. Kindly write an answer to these questions and post your answers in the comment section below. So this concludes our discussion for today. Thanks for watching.